Chuck is asking about, since we were talking the Michigan game, about the recruiting landscape changing rivalry games, the national approach.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it. Does this game mean as much as it could or it should to all these guys who are recruited from California and Florida, and a backbone of an Ohio State team should be Ohio guys. I mean, Ohio produces enough talent, and I think we're seeing with Ryan Day that they're trying really hard to add as much good Ohio talent as they possibly can. So, are some guys slipping through the cracks here and there? Well, yeah, sure, but I don't think it's been anything that's been an epidemic or anything. But yeah, I think that it definitely helps. I mean, the better Ohio State teams, usually about half the guys are from Ohio in the starting lineup. So I'm not sure it's quite been like that in recent years. So yeah, I definitely see that as an impetus and a way to prioritize a rivalry game. In recent years, they've only been signing 6, 7, 8 Ohio guys. That's like 1/3 of your class. So just the raw numbers of that dictate that 1/3 of your starters are going to be from Ohio if you only take 1/3 of your prospects from Ohio. So your hit rate on Ohio guys should be better just because they're going to stick it out maybe a little bit longer. I brought up J.K. Johnson a little bit earlier, a guy from out of state that just didn't see a future at Ohio State, but didn't want to stick it out to see if there would be a future. So, and not to pick on him because there's other guys that have taken that route, but it just shows you that sometimes the path of least resistance is what some of the out of state guys will look for, and that can kind of creep into your thinking there sometimes when it's cold, it's snowing, and it ain't going real well. That maybe this isn't your day, but I don't like to say negative things about guys or say that people quit or anything like that. But the fourth quarter of that last Michigan game was the worst quarter of football Ohio State's played in probably 25 years. So you think about that takes in a lot of real estate. So maybe having guys where it means more to them on the front end will give you better results on the back end. But I'm open to suggestion on that. I mean, if you have Marvin Harrison, I don't care if he's from Mars.
Right. Well, and the point that I was going to make is that okay, I can make the argument that national recruiting may take away a little bit from that, but we're not. I mean, national recruiting is not anything new at this point. And we look at these guys, and while we're still calling them amateurs, they're pros. I mean, at the height of your game, you're still a pro, NIL, et cetera, et cetera. When you get drafted by the Chicago Bears and you're from Arizona, you're going to realize really quickly that when you're playing the Packers, that means something. That's a rivalry there. So I don't know if you necessarily have to grow up with a rivalry, have geography on your side for a rivalry. If that's what draws it out of you, I just think it's a matter of education and just being around people who understand it and being a student of the game itself. So I don't know if I'm going to sit there and say that, player A out of Arizona or player B out of South Florida or player C out of Washington State doesn't understand the rivalry or doesn't give that extra 10% to get to 110% in a rivalry game. I just think it's kind of the case of what it is. I think that we're going to see. I don't know if we're going to see as many rivalries that are true legitimate rivalries. I'm not going to say Georgia Tech. I don't consider that a rivalry. There's such a huge chasm between where those programs are and will probably always be in terms of football. I don't know if we're going to see a lot of prolonged runs the way that Ohio State had it over Michigan. I don't think we're going to see in the Iron Bowl on the regular Alabama win 10 of 11 against Auburn or whatever. I don't know if we're going to see that in some of these rivalry games because I think that just based on the nature of where college football has gone and NIL dollars and the portal and everything else. We keep coming back to that, but it's true that we're going to see teams a little bit closer, and it's going to come down to some other points, be it coaching or whatever, that's going to determine a lot of these things. And truthfully speaking, as we know in football, there's a luck element that's involved. There's, whether or not it's a ball bounces your right way, or you're the Kansas City Chiefs and you get a defensive holding call going your way in the final minute of the game. I mean, there's a luck component in there too. So I don't know if I'm going to say that national recruiting is necessarily diminishing the rivalries. But I'm also not going to put my heels down and say nothing would change my mind on it. But that's just my feeling on it right now.
I can't disagree with any of that from either one of you. But you guys will probably know this statement a little bit more precisely than I remember it. But didn't Jim Tressel make a statement one time about Ohio born and bred players just giving a little bit more in the fourth quarter when things get tough, or maybe on the practice field in the middle of August? Or he just made some kind of statement about his, I don't know if it was his preference, but in terms of wanting to have a strong element of Ohio players on the roster.
It's a hell of a recruiting pitch, and it certainly is going to get the home base happy. And, we're also talking about it's funny to think the Jim Tressel era was a different era of football than what we're in right now. And, there wasn't necessarily the portal in the instance. You had to sit out a year. You had to get it cleared and everything else. NIL back in that day were just McDonald's bags filled with $100 bills and things like that. I'm not saying that happened at Ohio State. I'm just saying you didn't have this full mechanism in place that's there today. And let's not forget that Jim Tressel's recruiting was largely Ohio-centric, as we know. Put a fence around the state of Ohio, go to Indiana, go to Pennsylvania, go to Florida. That's where he was typically recruiting for the most part. And I know that in the comments, I could get 20, 50, 60 players listed that are like, well, this guy was from Missouri. This guy was from here. I get it. I understand. That's not necessarily the point I'm trying to make. But when you're sitting there and you're trying to right the wrongs of where the rivalry had gone with your predecessor, all of those comments are welcome. And whatever the factual basis is on it, that's up for debate.
Yeah, Tressel, I think he had this notion that Ohio was king and that there's no better place for football than Ohio. And he did sign about half of his guys from Ohio, but Ohio also produced a ton of talent. I mean, in his time, and I don't want to say it's diminished a bit in recent years, but yeah, I think if you did any kind of a case study on it, NFL players or All-Americans or however you want to look at it, 5 stars, 4 stars, whatever, you won't find that many Ohio guys in the last decade that light up those lists. So, some of it is bias, I think. The industry seems to be based in Nashville, Tennessee, which is in the heart of SEC country, and I think there is a bias. I think for some of the analysts who operate out of there and see that, but there's also built-in advantages of playing high school football in Florida too. I mean, they have spring football. They do other things. And that's been kind of a debate in Ohio if they should ever go to that. It seems like the baseball and the track coaches, their lobby has won out every time that's come up. And a lot of unintended circumstances that kind of come with that. I mean, if you add spring football in Ohio, you've got to pay people to run it. I mean, you've got to pay the coaches.
Coaches don't want to sit there and add that to their thing and not be compensated.
And not get paid. Yeah, an extra 10 or 15 days of work for these high school teachers. Their time is precious as well. So, there's this romantic notion, they're just going to coach for the good of the game. Well, they're trying to put their kids through college just same as everybody else. I mean, every dime counts to them just as much as it does to anybody else. So I think it's an issue whose time has come to be discussed. I don't really think we need to have guys out there butting heads in full pads in April, but some limited activities. I don't have an issue with it. Maybe 10, 12 days, something like that. I don't know what. I'm open.
And one other point I want to make about in-state recruiting too is not only, and I know I've said it on this show and multiple shows before, you're still going to have your top 5, top 6, top 7 kids from Ohio that are going to be recruited by just about everybody. I think where talent has changed, though, it's what is 8 through 25. And I think 8 through 25 within the state today is a little bit different than what 8 through 25 was during Jim Tressel's era. And you were able to fill the roster and recruit and land 13 of the top 15 kids of the state of Ohio. But I think also you saw with Jim Tressel, a lot of teams that were built to win the Big Ten that necessarily were not in the best position to win the national championship in some of those situations. And the other point I wanted to make too is we've seen a lot of changes in terms of where the talent is coming from in the state of Ohio. It used to be Cleveland, Cincinnati, and there was a really sparse in Central Ohio. Well, Cleveland's been dry for a couple years now. Columbus, the greater Central Ohio area has been very strong. And then Cincinnati, certainly Winton Woods, some places like that, Lakota West, they've had guys. We're seeing Ohio get a little bit stronger. Now, Glenville suddenly has guys again. Now, Ohio State gets Rivalries in this most recent class of 23. I would expect Ohio State to land Bryce West. Yeah. And then the jumbo athlete, Witten. Can't remember his first name off the top of my head.
Jamarian, is that it?
Jamarian Witten. So I think that you're going to see Ohio State be able to recruit a little bit more in the state, because the truth is there have to be the kids worthy of recruiting in terms of what their athletic prowess is and that they're going to be able to contribute and play. It's all well and good to sit there and say, I'm waving the banner for the state of Ohio. And if none of these guys pan out, guess what? You're going to be waving a banner over there in front of Cricket Wireless, spinning one of those big arrows because you're going to be out of work.
I just posted the number of NFL players by state for the 2022 NFL season. I was a bit pleasantly surprised to see Ohio that prominent at number 5, but to Steve's point, we could see that dwindling a little bit more here in the next few years with obviously many of those players, who knows, they've got 7, 8, 10 years in the NFL. And so this isn't any kind of recent count, but again, it is recent to the NFL and the players produced by each state.
Yeah, that's interesting to say the least.
Pennsylvania falling. The Pennsylvania used to be much higher.
Yeah. California, to me, I would have thought would have been higher just because the population out there is so huge. But Texas, Florida, Georgia.
California isn't as much of a football state as we'd like to believe it is. The population certainly does play a factor in there, but Texas, I've watched Friday Night Lights. I've
the culture.
Red Junction Boys. I mean, I get it. Florida is Florida as well, but California is not as football crazy as you would think. But it's always been Texas, Florida, California have been your top 3 producers of collegiate talent for sure. And then where does that go there? But when you sit there and you put it like on a per capita basis, you get states like Louisiana, 71 kids right there and a much smaller population. So you have a much higher per capita rate, which is what a lot of people are getting kind of fixated on right now.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. I'm going to have to do a case study on this. This is very, very interesting stuff.
And I think we mentioned it a few weeks ago. Alabama is definitely on the rise as a state playing high school football, producing 4- and 5-star talent.